We have the Burj Khalifa there in the background and this nice foreground element of the tower on the left-hand side. What will happen towards sunset and in the night is you'll get these beautiful trails along the road with all the cars with their lights on. So it gives us a really nice setting for a time lapse. And I'll just be showing you the settings I use and the composition in order to really make this one stand out. So first off, I've obviously got the grid there to show the level. And we want that in the green zone just to make sure our horizon is straight. I'm just going to lift this up a bit just to make sure that we've got a nice bit of sky there above the top of the tower. And then we're going to lock that in place on the tripod because we really want to make sure everything is sturdy. And we want to avoid as much movement as possible with the camera, especially if there's wind. You want to weigh down your tripod so that things don't move around and you get jitters between each frame. So I think the frame itself is looking good. We're on a very wide lens here, 20 millimeters, to try and get most of the city in. I think a 14 might also be good here, or 16 to 35, but all the key elements are in the frame here for this one. And I put my camera here into aperture priority mode, and that's because I want the camera to automatically adjust the settings as the sun is dipping. As the exposure is changing throughout the frame, what's going to happen when you're in manual mode is it will keep the exposure the same throughout, so the frame's going to darken dramatically. And when it gets to night, that day-to-night time-lapse, it's really going to affect the quality of the time-lapse. You're going to have to manually adjust the exposure on each frame. What aperture priority will do is it will do that for you. It will slowly adjust the exposure to match the matrix that you've chosen, the exposure matrix. And that for me is the whole image here. And that'll mean that we can have a smooth transition from day to night and get that nice sunset color throughout the frame. So what I'm going to do now is jump into the interval mode. So I'm going to press menu, and this is in the drive mode. So it's number 5 on the shooting menu. Going to head into drive mode, interval shooting, and this interval shooting on means that the next time I press the shutter, the time lapse will begin. Shooting start time just means that it's going to take a slight delay, like a self-timer, before it takes the first shot. And our shooting interval is quite important here. So the shooting interval, say you have a movie with 25 or 30 frames, you can then determine how long that movie is going to last when you put it into a time-lapse video. For example, if we have 100 shots, the time-lapse at 25 frames per second will only be 4 seconds of video. So if you take 1,000 shots, you might get 40 seconds of video. But then you might want to speed that up, and then if you sped it up 10 times again, that 40-second video sped up 10 times might only be 4 seconds. So ideally, you want to be trying to get as many shots as you can. That's not going to break the card on your camera. You don't want to fill up a card and lose half of a night shooting or a sunset shooting because your card's full. So I think we can have a time lapse of, let's say, every 5 seconds, and then we can go back. If we adjust our number of shots now, we're going to have 2 hours 46, which I think is a really good time for day to night time lapses. What we're then going to do is jump into our AE tracking sensitivity. Well, I think we can just leave that at mid. That just means your exposure tracking throughout the frame. I think we can leave that there. The shutter type in electronic, that means that there won't be any shutter shock throughout the frame, and also you can basically not wear out the shutter shooting thousands of images in time-lapse. Our shoot interval to priority, that just means it will override any settings we put in on the aperture priority mode in order to reach our shutter timer, which is every 5 seconds. So in this case, I don't think our exposures are going to go over 5 seconds, so that doesn't matter. But say we're shooting at night and our exposures might reach 10 seconds, it's actually going to cancel that exposure sooner, and it will shoot the interval first, this interval that we chose up here, this shooting interval 5 seconds. So anyway, back to the settings. This one's a fairly simple one. I'm going to put the ISO at 100, or 80 for the A7S III, which is something I didn't mention. I'm shooting on the A7S III here. That's to minimize the actual huge files that will clog on my computer. This one's perfectly fine for a 4K time lapse. It shoots 4K stills, and that means If I shoot 1,000 frames, it's not going to be 400 gigabytes on my computer. It's going to be a lot smaller. So I love to use my A7S III, that sort of smaller megapixel camera, to shoot my time lapses while I'm shooting with my A camera, the A1, just various frames and different compositions, which doesn't require a tripod. So here we have the ISO at 80. I'm going to turn my exposure value down. So I'm going to adjust the exposure value down to 0, just to make sure that we're getting a balanced frame. We can increase our f-stop to about 6. That's going to give us the sharpest frame possible. And then probably just raise the shadows a bit on this one actually to about 0.3. I'm going to focus on a point around 2/3 into the frame. I think this edge here works well. Then what I'll do is I'll switch the camera into manual focus. That's to make sure the focus point doesn't move as we're shooting a time lapse. And now we're pretty much ready to go. One more thing I would make sure to do is to set the white balance to a fixed number. This means that there won't be any variable shifts over the course of the time lapse, and it will avoid any color shifting throughout the frame. I've got my camera creative look at neutral as always, and the rest is looking good. So what we do now is I will just go back into the menu, turn off the interval shooting, take a frame, and then I'm going to review the frame, make sure it looks good, everything is sharp, and then we're good to go. So I go back into menu, interval shooting on, and away we go. So this is going to shoot for a couple of hours, as long as the battery lasts, and I can just keep shooting now. One thing I will do at this point is I'll turn off the display. So I'm going to press up arrow on the display on the back of the camera, and what that will do is it will save battery. I mean, we won't have to waste battery showing the back of the monitor or the viewfinder in that case. One last little tip, if you are concerned about batteries, you can purchase external batteries that basically mean you can charge the camera directly through a mains port or through a generator. You could also charge your camera overnight with a battery pack, like a portable power bank with the USB-C. And I use that quite often on nighttime lapses because these things go overnight and the camera is going to run out of battery pretty quick. So I'm going to leave this one going for a couple of hours, and I'll hopefully be able to show you an amazing result.